The silence in Scottsdale is different than anywhere else. It's heavy, baked by a sun that doesn't know when to quit, and usually I find it peaceful. But that Tuesday afternoon, sitting in my garage with a Motngin Chincham Salmui Bay Ford Mustang that was more rust than car, the silence was shattered by a single, sharp chime from my phone. I wiped the grease from my hands onto a shop rag, expecting a notification from my brokerage account, or maybe a weather alert for a coming dust storm. Instead, I saw a text from my son-in-law, Sean. "We're done with you forever. Stop trying to control our lives. Never contact us again. We mean it." I stared at the screen for a long time. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I've spent 38 years as a financial consultant. I've seen markets crash, fortunes vanish in a weekend, and grown men weep over bad investments. I've learned that when a crisis hits, the worst thing you can do is react with emotion. You look at the data, you assess the risk, you plan the exit strategy. But this wasn't a portfolio. This was my daughter. A second later, the follow-up came from Rachel. It was shorter, but it cut deeper. "Dad, I think it's better this way. We need space to build our own life without constant judgment. I hope you understand. Take care of yourself." I sat down on my workbench stool, the smell of motor oil and old leather surrounding me. 6 years. That's how long I'd been the invisible scaffolding holding up their world. My name is Daniel Fisher, and at 64, I was supposed to be enjoying a quiet retirement. Instead, I had become a human ATM for a 37-year-old mid-level manager with a God complex, and a daughter who had forgotten the value of $1 because she hadn't had to earn one in years. I remember when Sean Miller first walked into my life 7 years ago. He had that firm, practiced handshake, and called me sir with a frequency that felt like he'd rehearsed it in the car. Back then, I thought he was just a polite, ambitious guy. I didn't realize that sir was a down payment on my trust. The independence they were so desperate for now had been bought and paid for by me from day one. I thought back to the first major withdrawal, the Heimweh Tom, home down payment for their house on Canyon View Lane. I could still see Rachel's face, her eyes shining with tears, as she told me they'd never be able to start a family without a real home. I didn't even hesitate. I'm a father. That's the job, right? You build the floor so they don't have to hit the ground. But the floor kept getting higher. First it was the down payment. Then it was the temporary help with the car loans, Sean's Ford F-Mot and Rachel's Honda Accord. Then it was the insurance premiums. Then the medical coverage. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, their lives became a line item in my monthly budget. I pulled up my banking app right there in the garage, my thumb hovering over the screen. I did what I do best. I looked at the numbers. Every month, like clockwork, Hi, Bon Chum, left my retirement account and flowed into theirs. Mot Bon Chum Nam Mui for the mortgage, Sao Chum Tam Mui for the cars, Hai Chum Bai Mui for the insurance. Over 6 years, that was Mot Chum Bai Mui Hai, Tam Chum. If you added the down payment and the emergencies, the broken HVAC, the kitchen renovation they needed, the debt consolidation I had poured over, Hai Chum hung into a black hole of entitlement. And yet, Sean had the nerve to talk to me about control. The control he was referring to happened 3 nights ago. It was supposed to be a simple Saturday dinner. Rachel had made pot roast my favorite. I'd walked in with a bottle of decent wine, hoping we could just be a family. But the moment I stepped into their living room, I saw it. It was a television that looked like it belonged in a stadium, a Bay Mui Laminch Tham K resolution beast that must have cost at least $3,000. Sean was standing in front of it, chest puffed out, holding the remote like a scepter. "Check it out, Daniel," he'd said, not even looking at me. Quantum dot technology, top of the line. I figured we deserved a little upgrade. I looked at the TV, then at Rachel, who was avoiding my eyes while she set the table. Just 2 weeks prior, she'd called me crying because their credit card debt had hit Mui Mot, Hung, and the interest was suffocating them. I'd given her the money to clear the highest interest card, under the condition that they sit down with me and look at a budget. "That's quite a piece of equipment, Sean," I'd said, keeping my voice level. "Did you manage to clear those other cards first? The ones with the high Mui Bone % APR? The air in the room didn't just chill, it froze. Sean turned to me, his face reddening. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, Daniel. We invite you into our home, and you immediately start auditing us. It's our money. It's our life." "It's your life, Sean," I replied. "But it's mostly my money. I'm just trying to make sure you're not building a castle on a foundation of sand." That was the spark. Sean exploded, accusing me of using my wealth to keep them under my thumb. He told me I didn't respect him as a man. He told me I was a financial ghost haunting their marriage. And Rachel, she just stood there. She didn't defend me. She didn't remind him who paid for the very floor he was stomping on. She just whispered, "Dad, maybe you should go. You do make everything about money." Driving home that night, I'd felt a hairline fracture in my heart. But sitting in my garage now, reading those "done with you" texts, that fracture finally shattered. They wanted independence. They wanted a life without my judgment. I didn't realize it yet, but that text message was the most expensive mistake Sean Miller would ever make. I stood up and walked into my house, the cool air conditioning hitting me like a splash of cold water. I sat at my mahogany desk, the one where I'd planned the retirements of some of the wealthiest people in Arizona. I opened my laptop and logged into my primary Chase account. I navigated to the Scheduled Transfers tab. There they were. 3 automatic payments, set to trigger on the 1st of every month. Click. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring transfer to Chase Mortgage? Confirm. Click. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring transfer to Ford Credit? Confirm. Click. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring transfer to Honda Financial? Confirm. It took less than 60 seconds to erase a bone chum a month of control. I felt a strange, hollow sense of peace. I wasn't being petty. I wasn't being vindictive. I was simply honoring their request. They wanted me out of their lives? Fine. But they forgot that in the world of finance, you can't cancel the subscription and keep the service. I looked at my calendar. Today was March 9th. Their mortgage was due on the 1st. Their car payments were due on the same day. In exactly 13 days, the reality of independence was going to hit them like a freight train. I thought about Rachel. I thought about the way she used to hold my hand when she was 5, terrified of the dark. I wondered if she had any idea what Sean had just done. I wondered if she knew that their tech bonus lifestyle was about to evaporate. I didn't call them. I didn't text back with an angry rant. I just put my phone on Do Not Disturb and went back to my Mustang. I had a lot of work to do on that car, and for the first time in years, I had an extra high bone chum a month to spend on the parts I'd been putting off buying. As I picked up my wrench, a thought crossed my mind, a cold, calculating thought that only a man who deals in numbers can have. Sean and Rachel had a combined take-home pay of about $tam between their credit card debt, their lifestyle, and now the sudden, high, bone chum hole in their budget. They were going to be in the red by the end of April. By June, they'd be desperate. By July, well, July would be interesting. I didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just about stopping payments. It was about a total restructuring of power. Sean thought he was cutting ties with a controlling father. He didn't realize he was declaring war on his only benefactor. And I've never lost a war involving a spreadsheet. I turned the radio on in the garage, classic rock, low and steady. I felt lighter than I had in a decade. They wanted to stand on their own 2 feet. I was going to give them the chance. I just hoped they'd practice their balance, because the ground was about to get very, very shaky. Around chin, come PM, my phone lit up on the workbench. It was a notification from our shared Costco account. Sean had just spent bone chum way high on bulk electronics and groceries. He was still using my card. He was still using my membership. He was done with me, but he was still eating my food and charging me for the privilege. I didn't get angry. I actually smiled. I opened the Costco app, went to the account settings, and with 2 taps, I removed them as authorized users and reported the secondary cards as lost. Independence starts now, Sean, I whispered to the empty garage. I went to bed and slept better than I had in years, but as I closed my eyes, I couldn't help but think about the look on Sean's face when he'd try to buy gas the next morning. It was just the beginning. I had 38 years of professional precision behind me, and I was about to apply every bit of it to the most important audit of my life. What happened next would change everything, but for now, I was just a retired man with a beautiful blue car and a very, very quiet phone. I woke up the next morning at home a.m., a habit 38 years of corporate life had etched into my bones. Usually, the first thing I do is check the Nikkei and the pre-market futures, but this morning, I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling fan's rhythmic rotation. The silence in the house felt different, sharper, like the air right before a thunderstorm. I had effectively cut the umbilical cord I'd been feeding for 6 years, and I was waiting for the first twitch of the corpse. I didn't know it yet, but the next 48 hours would be the quietest of my life, followed by a noise I wasn't entirely sure I was ready for. To understand how I got to the point of systematically dismantling my own daughter's financial life, you have to understand who Rachel was before Sean Miller arrived with his firm handshake and his hollow ambitions. Rachel was my birdie. When she was 6, she'd wait by the front door every evening, her little pigtails bouncing as she screamed, "Daddy's home." Before I'd even turned off the ignition, we were a team. After my wife Diane passed away when Rachel was only 14, it was just the two of us against the world. I poured everything into her tutors, piano lessons, a debt-free college education at U of A. I wanted her to be strong, capable, and, most importantly, independent. That's the irony that keeps me up at night. I raised her to be independent, but I loved her so much that I never actually let her practice it. When she brought Sean home 7 years ago, I wanted to like him. I really did. He was a mid-level manager at a tech firm in Phoenix, a title that sounds impressive until you realize it mostly involves sitting in meetings about other meetings. He was polite to a fault, calling me Sir and Mr. Fisher with a robotic consistency. At the time, I thought it was respect. Looking back, it was a strategy. It's hard to say no to a man who treats you like a king, especially when he's holding your daughter's hand. The first warning sign should have been the wedding. Sean wanted the Phoenician, a luxury resort that costs more for a weekend than some people make in a year. He talked about branding and networking, and how image is everything in his industry. He didn't have a dime saved, of course. "Mr. Fisher," he had said, sitting in this very living room, leaning forward with that practiced sincerity, "I want to give Rachel the world. I'm in a growth phase at work. Once my commissions kick in, I'll be able to handle everything. But for this one day, I want her to feel like a queen. If you could just bridge the gap." I bridged the gap. I bridged it to the tune of Bon Mui Lam, Hung. And when the commissions never materialized, and the growth phase turned into a permanent plateau, I bridged the next gap too. It started slowly, like watching rust spread across the chrome of my Mustang. You don't notice it on a Tuesday, but by Sunday, the shine is gone. It was a high, hung loan for a transmission repair that never got repaid. It was nam, hung for initial house expenses after I'd already given them the down payment. It was the way Sean would talk at dinner parties, swirling a glass of expensive scotch that I had bought while explaining his investment strategies to my friends. "You have to be aggressive in this market," he'd say, leaning back while Rachel looked at him with pure adoration. I told Rachel, "We're not just buying a house, we're acquiring an asset. You have to leverage your capital." I would sit there, nursing my drink, listening to a man who couldn't afford his own car insurance talk to me about leveraging capital. I stayed quiet for Rachel's sake. I told myself it was just a phase. I told myself that by helping them, I was giving them the breathing room they needed to succeed. What I was actually doing was building a cage out of gold bars, and Sean was the one who held the key. By the second year of their marriage, the loans had become contributions. There was no longer any talk of paying me back. Instead, it was, "Dad, with the inflation the way it is, our mortgage is really tight this month. Do you think you could cover the difference?" The difference was the entire payment. I remember a specific afternoon, about 3 years ago. I'd stopped by their place unannounced to drop off some tools Sean had borrowed and never returned. I found him in the driveway, power washing a brand new boat. A sleek, white and blue center console that had no business being in the driveway of a man who'd asked me for tam chum for groceries the week before. "New hobby, Sean?" I asked, my voice tight. He didn't even look embarrassed. He just turned off the power washer and grinned. "It's an investment, Daniel. We're going to rent it out on weekends. It'll pay for itself in 6 months." "And the money for the investment?" I asked. "Where did that come from?" "Credit," he said, like it was a magic word. "Low interest, high reward. You taught me that, didn't you?" That was the first time I realized Sean didn't just want my money, he wanted my life. He wanted the prestige of being a self-made man without the 38 years of 60-hour work weeks. And he was using my daughter as his human shield. Every time I tried to bring up their spending, Sean would pivot. He'd tell Rachel I was judging them. He'd tell her I didn't trust her to be an adult. He was gaslighting my daughter into believing that her father's generosity was actually an insult. And it was working. The birdie who used to scream "Daddy's home" was replaced by a woman who looked at me with suspicion. Our phone calls, once long and filled with laughter, became short and transactional. "Hi, Dad. Yeah, we're good. Sean's busy. Hey, did you see that transfer go through? Okay, cool. Talk later." I became a ghost in my own family, a presence felt only when the bank account ran low. I didn't know it yet, but the breaking point was already in motion. It wasn't just the Bay Mui Luminch TV. It was the psychological toll of watching a man dismantle my daughter's character while I financed the tools he used to do it. By Wednesday, the silence from their end was deafening. I spent the day in the garage, but I wasn't working. I was thinking. I pulled out the old file from their house closing. I'm a meticulous record keeper. It's what made me a good consultant. I had copies of everything: the wire transfers, the emails where Sean promised "this is the last time," the screenshots of the car loan balances. I also had something they'd forgotten about. When I gave them the down payment for the house, I had insisted on being listed as a secondary contact for the mortgage account. At the time, I told them it was just so I could monitor the escrow for tax purposes. Sean had rolled his eyes, but he'd signed the paperwork because, back then, the Haimuitam Hung was more important than his pride. That little piece of paper meant that while I didn't own the house, the bank saw me as a vested party in the payments. It meant that when the payments stopped, and they were going to stop, I wouldn't just be a bystander. I'd be the first person the bank called. I was sitting at my workbench, cleaning a set of spark plugs, when my phone finally buzzed. It wasn't a text, it was a notification from my bank. Insufficient funds for external transfer. Ford credit. I smiled. Sean had tried to make a manual payment. He'd realized the automatic one was canceled and had tried to push a payment through from their joint account, the account that was usually empty by the high month of the month because they lived on the razor's edge of my subsidies. He was starting to feel the air get thin. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Rachel. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't want to hear her voice yet, not the birdie voice, and certainly not the defensive, Sean-scripted voice she'd been using lately. The voicemail notification popped up a minute later. I played it on speaker. "Dad? Hey, it's me. Look, Sean said something about the car payment not going through. There must be a glitch with your bank or something. Can you check on that? We've got a lot going on today, and we don't want to get hit with a late fee. Just call me back. Bye." She sounded annoyed, not worried, not apologetic, just annoyed that the glitch was inconveniencing their day. She still believed the money was a law of nature like gravity or the Arizona heat. It was just there. I didn't call back. Instead, I went back to the Mustang. I was working on the interior now, stripping out the dry rotted carpeting. It's a dirty, miserable job. You have to scrape away years of filth and decay before you can put down something new. It's the only way to do a proper restoration. You can't just put new carpet over old rot. It smells. It spreads. I was about halfway through the floorboards when a black SUV pulled into my driveway, not the Ford F-Mot Chumnamui. This was Sean's work car, a leased Audi he'd insisted on because clients expect a certain level of success. I didn't get up. I just kept scraping. I heard the car door slam. I heard the heavy, aggressive footsteps on the concrete. Sean appeared in the garage door frame, blocking the sun. He was wearing his work suit, but he'd ditched the tie. His face was that specific shade of red he gets when he's been stuck in traffic or when someone tells him no. "Daniel," he said, his voice tight. "Rachel said you aren't answering your phone." I didn't look up. "I'm busy, Sean. Restoring things takes time." "We have a problem," he said, stepping further into the garage. "The car payments didn't go through, and I just tried to buy gas at the Chevron down the street, and my Costco card was declined. The clerk said the account was closed." I stopped scraping and looked at him. I let the silence hang there for a beat, the kind of silence I used to use in boardrooms to make people sweat. "I know," I said simply. Sean blinked. He wasn't expecting that. He was expecting an apology, a "let me call the bank," or a "must be a mistake." "What do you mean, you know?" "I mean," I said, standing up and wiping my hands on my apron, "I'm respecting your wishes, Sean. You sent me a text all caps, if I recall, telling me you were done with me forever. You told me never to contact you again. You told me to stop controlling your life." I took a step toward him. I'm 64, but I've stayed fit, and I had a heavy metal scraper in my hand. So, I stopped. I canceled the payments. I removed you from the accounts. I am officially out of your life, just like you asked. Why are you here? Isn't this contact? Sean's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in 7 years, the Sir mask was completely gone. Behind it was a man who had suddenly realized he was standing on a trap door, and I was the one with the lever. You can't do that, he stammered. We have bills. The mortgage is due in 10 days. You can't just stop. Watch me, I said. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment the family revenge truly began. Sean wasn't just angry anymore. He was terrified. And a terrified man with an ego like Sean's is a dangerous thing. Rachel is going to hate you for this. He hissed, his voice dropping an octave. You think you're teaching me a lesson. You're just losing your daughter. I'll make sure of it. He turned and stormed back to his Audi. As he backed out of the driveway, his tires screeched against the pavement, a loud, desperate sound that echoed through the quiet neighborhood. I stood in the garage, watching the dust settle. My heart was thumping now, a steady, heavy beat. I knew what was coming. I knew the phone calls, the tears, and the accusations were about to start. I knew Sean would go home and paint me as the villain of the story. But I also knew something he didn't. I knew exactly how much was in their savings account. I knew their debt-to-income ratio better than they did. And I knew that in exactly 9 days, when the mortgage payment didn't hit the bank's server, the independence Sean so loudly demanded was going to turn into a cage he couldn't afford to keep. I picked up the scraper and went back to work. There was still a lot of rot to clear away before I could start building something new. The silence that followed the screech of Sean's tires was the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the air in a room just before the floor gives way. I stood in the center of my garage, the metal scraper still in my hand, feeling the heat of the Arizona evening beginning to bleed out of the concrete. I'd spent my entire career anticipating market shifts, but nothing quite prepares you for the moment you realize you've officially become the villain in your daughter's story. I didn't know it yet, but the next few hours would be a masterclass in psychological warfare, and Sean Miller was about to prove exactly how much of a coward he really was. The phone didn't ring for a long time. I went inside, washed the grease from my hands, and made a pot of coffee I didn't really want. I sat at my kitchen island, watching the red digital clock on the stove. Sao, 4:30 p.m. Sao, 4:30 p.m. I knew the call was coming. I'm a numbers man. I calculate probability for fun. There was a 1% chance Sean would go straight home and tell Rachel I'd attacked him or threatened him. There was a 1% chance he wouldn't tell her, that he'd walked into my garage and demanded I keep paying for his life after telling me to rot. When the phone finally lit up, it wasn't a call. It was a flurry of texts from Rachel. How could you? Sean just came home shaking. He said you threatened him with a weapon. Dad, please tell me you didn't do this. Please tell me the bank made a mistake. I felt a sharp, familiar pang in my chest, the birdie pang. It's the part of me that still wants to fix her scraped knees, the part that wants to make the world stop spinning so she doesn't get dizzy. But then I looked at the word weapon. I looked at my metal scraper, sitting on the workbench in the other room. Sean was already spinning the narrative. He was turning a financial audit into a criminal assault. I didn't reply to the texts. I picked up the phone and dialed her number. She answered on the half ring. Dad, her voice was wet, thick with tears. Dad, Sean said, he said you were terrifying. He said you cut everything off because you're mad about a TV. It's just a TV, Dad. We can take it back. Just, please, fix the bank account before the mortgage bounces. Rachel, I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's. Did Sean tell you what his text said yesterday? The one where he told me I was done? The one where he told me never to contact you again? Silence. A long, agonizing pause where I could hear her breathing, and then a muffled sound in the background. Sean's voice, sharp and commanding. He said he was just setting boundaries, she whispered. He said you were suffocating us. Boundaries are for people, Rachel, not for bank accounts, I replied. You can't have a boundary that includes me paying high bone chum a month for your house and cars while you tell me I'm not allowed to speak to you. That's not a boundary. That's a hostage situation. But the house, Dad, we'll lose the house. No, I said, and this was the hardest thing I've ever had to say. You won't lose the house. You'll just have to pay for it. You both have jobs. You both make decent money. If you can't afford a bon chum namui mortgage on a chum hai mui home combined income, then you have a spending problem, not a May problem. The line went dead. She didn't hang up. I could hear the faint click of Sean taking the phone from her. "You're a cold son of a bitch, Daniel," Sean hissed into the receiver. "You want to play financial advisor? Fine, we'll figure it out. We don't need your blood money. But don't you dare cry when you're sitting in that big empty house of yours on Christmas realizing you have no one left." The line actually went dead that time. I set the phone on the counter and realized my hand was finally shaking. Not from fear, but from the sheer, unadulterated weight of the betrayal. Sean was right about one thing. The house was empty. But it was empty because I'd spent the last 6 years filling their house instead of my own life. What happened next was a slow-motion car crash that lasted the rest of the week. See, Sean and Rachel didn't realize that my control went far deeper than the mortgage. When you bankroll someone's life for 6 years, you become the invisible glue in the cracks. On Thursday, I got a notification that the family cell phone plan was due for renewal. I'd had Rachel and Sean on my legacy plan since they got married. It was a mocham tamui a month expense they never even saw. I didn't cancel it. Not yet. I just moved them to a sub-account and stopped the auto pay from my card. Then came the utilities. I'd set up a secondary account for their water and electricity years ago because Rachel had forgotten to pay them 3 months in a row, and their power had been cut off in the middle of a mochumur degree July. I'd been paying those bills ever since, thinking I was protecting my daughter from the heat. I logged into the portal and removed my payment method. By Friday, the reality was beginning to set in for them. I stayed in my garage, working on the Mustang's wiring harness. It's a delicate process. One wrong connection, and you can fry the whole system. You have to trace every wire back to its source. I was tracing a ground wire when I remembered a moment from 3 years ago. We were at a family dinner, one of the few where things felt normal. Sean was talking about a promotion he was definitely getting. He was acting like the big provider, ordering the most expensive steak on the menu and a bottle of wine that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. When the check came, I reached for it, as I always did. But for a split second, I hesitated. I wanted to see if he'd even make the reach, the polite gesture of offering to split it. He didn't. He didn't even look at the bill. He just kept talking about his growth strategy, while Rachel smiled and patted his hand. I paid the bonchum tab, and as we walked out, Sean leaned over and whispered to me, "Thanks for the meal, Dan. It's nice that you have so much disposable income. Must be nice not to have real responsibilities." I didn't know it then, but that was the day I started the spreadsheet. Back in the present, Friday night brought a different kind of notification. It was an email from a private investigator I'd hired 2 days ago. His name was Miller, and I'd asked him to do a deep dive into Sean's investments. If Sean was going to use my daughter as a shield, I wanted to know exactly what kind of sword he was carrying. The report was waiting in my inbox. I opened it, expecting to see a few maxed-out credit cards or maybe a secret gambling habit. What I found was much, much worse. Sean Miller didn't just have debt. He had a secondary life. According to the records, Sean had opened a business LLC 3 years ago. He'd been funneling money thousands of dollars into a consulting firm that had no clients, no office, and no revenue. But the firm did have expenses. There were charges for high-end hotels in Vegas, jewelry stores in Scottsdale, and a monthly lease on a small apartment in Tempe that Rachel definitely didn't know about. My blood turned to ice. He wasn't just using my money to live beyond his means. He was using my money to fund a lifestyle that likely didn't include my daughter. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in the dark kitchen. I could call Rachel right now. I could blow his world apart with a single PDF attachment. I could end the war in 5 minutes. But I've been in finance too long. If you sell a stock too early, you lose the potential for the real payout. If I told her now, Sean would just claim I'd faked the documents. He'd say I was controlling her again, trying to break them up because I was a bitter old man. He'd double down on the gaslighting, and Rachel, terrified of being alone and losing her home, would believe him. I had to wait. I had to let the financial pressure cook him. I had to let him get so desperate that he started making mistakes she couldn't ignore. The first mistake happened Saturday morning. I was at the local hardware store, picking up some high-heat paint for the Mustang's engine block. As I was walking toward the checkout, I saw them. Rachel and Sean were 3 aisles over, near the appliances. They were looking at a new washer-dryer set. I ducked behind a display of power tools, my heart hammering. I shouldn't have been hiding, but I wanted to see the independence in action. Sean, we can't. Rachel was whispering, her voice frantic. The credit card was declined at the grocery store this morning. We're over the limit. We have to use the emergency cash Dad gave us for the HVAC. It's not an emergency fund, Ray, Sean snapped, his voice carrying further than he realized. It's capital, and our washer is leaking. If we don't get this one now, we'll spend more on laundromats. It's a smart investment. With what money? She cried, her voice cracking. Dad canceled the car payments. We have to find Saucham Tamui by Monday, or the bank is going to call. I'll handle it, Sean growled. I have a deal closing next week, a big one. Just use the other card, the one from the LLC. The what? Rachel asked, confused. Sean stiffened. Nothing. Just a business account I set up. Don't worry about it. I've got it under control. I watched as he pulled a card from his wallet, a sleek, black card I'd never seen before. He swiped it. The machine beeped. Denied. He swiped it again. Denied. The sales associate, a kid who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, cleared his throat. Sir, it says, account frozen. Sean's face went from red to a terrifying, pale purple. He looked like he was about to stroke out right there in front of the Maytags. Rachel just stood there, her hands over her mouth, looking at him like he was a stranger. There's a mistake, Sean stammered, grabbing the card back. The bank. They're probably auditing the business. It's routine. He grabbed Rachel's arm and practically dragged her toward the exit. She was stumbling, trying to keep up, her eyes darting around the store as if she was looking for a way out. She didn't see me. I stayed in the tool aisle for 10 minutes after they left. I felt sick. My daughter was drowning, and I was the one who had pulled the plug. But as I looked at the report on my phone, the one about the Tempe apartment and the jewelry, I knew I couldn't stop. If I saved her now, I was just saving Sean. What I didn't know was that Sean was already moving to his next play, and his next play involved something I hadn't accounted for: my house. When I got home, there was a man standing on my porch. He was wearing a cheap suit and carrying a clipboard. He looked up as I pulled into the driveway. Daniel Fisher? He asked. Who's asking? I'm with Apex Legal Services. I'm here to serve you with a formal petition for a restraining order, as well as a notice of intent to sue for intentional infliction of emotional distress and financial elder abuse, though you're the elder. The claim is being filed by your daughter regarding her inheritance rights. I took the papers, my fingers numb. Financial elder abuse? I repeated, almost laughing. I'm the one who paid for their lives for 6 years. I just deliver the papers, sir, the man said, heading back to his car. But if I were you, I'd get a lawyer. Your son-in-law seems motivated. I stood on my porch, the dry desert wind whipping the legal documents in my hand. Sean wasn't just going to let the money stop. He was going to try to take the rest of it by force. He was using my daughter's name to sue me for the money I'd already given them. But Sean had forgotten one very important detail about financial consultants. We don't just keep records of what we give. We keep records of what we own. And as I walked into my house, I realized it was time to stop being dad and start being the man who had survived 3 market crashes and 10 IRS audits without breaking a sweat. The war wasn't just about a mortgage anymore. It was about the fact that Sean had no idea who he was actually fighting, and by the time he figured it out, there wouldn't be enough capital in the world to save him. I picked up the phone and dialed my attorney. Gerald, it's Daniel. I need you to pull the deed for Tam Cham Chin High Canyon View Lane, and I need you to do it yesterday. What I was about to find out would change the entire trajectory of the next month. Sean hadn't just been spending my money. He'd been making moves on my property. And the cliffhanger wasn't whether they'd lose the house, it was who actually owned it in the first place. The legal papers felt like lead in my hands as I walked into the dimly lit office of Gerald Torres the following Monday morning. Gerald had been my attorney and a close friend, since we both had more hair and fewer regrets. He took one look at the petition for a restraining order and the notice of intent to sue, and he didn't even laugh. He just sighed, a long, weary sound that told me he'd seen this specific brand of family madness before. Financial elder abuse, Gerald muttered, leaning back in his leather chair. It's a bold move, Daniel. Usually people wait until the parent is actually senile before they try to flip the script like this. Sean's trying to argue that by providing a consistent level of support, You created a constructive trust, or an implied contract, and that withdrawing it suddenly constitutes emotional and financial harm. It's my money, Gerald, I said, my voice sounding raspy even to my own ears. I earned every cent of it, while he was probably still learning how to lie to his teachers. I know that, and you know that. But in a courtroom, he's going to paint you as a bitter patriarch who used money to buy his daughter's affection and then snatched it away the moment she tried to show a bit of independence. It's a classic gaslight. If he can get a judge to see you as unstable or punitive, he might get a temporary order to freeze some of your liquid assets to ensure the stability of the family unit while the case proceeds. My stomach did a slow, nauseating roll. He wants to freeze my accounts? He wants to stop me from using my own retirement? He's desperate, Daniel. He knows the mortgage is going to bounce in 72 hours. He's looking for a legal way to force your hand. Gerald pulled a thick manila folder toward him. But that's not the biggest problem. You asked me to pull the deed for the Canyon View property. I leaned forward. This was the part I'd been dreading. When I'd given them the haimuitam, home for the down payment, I'd been the one to handle the paperwork. I'd wanted to be sure it was done right. When we closed on that house, Gerald continued, the title was recorded as Rachel Miller and Sean Miller, as joint tenants. However, because you provided the entirety of the down payment and were listed as the secondary guarantor on the mortgage, there was a rider attached a secondary lien in your name for the amount of the gift, plus any subsequent capital improvements you paid for. I remember that, I said. It was a protection. In case they ever sold it, I'd get my initial investment back. Gerald looked at me, his expression grave. Daniel, did you ever sign a subordination agreement or a lien waiver in the last 18 months? Of course not. Why? Gerald slid a document across the desk. It was a copy of a filing from the Maricopa County Recorder's Office dated 6 months ago. My heart stopped. It was a notarized signature, my signature waiving the lien and allowing the primary owners to take out a home equity line of credit. I stared at the paper. The signature looked just like mine. The slant of the deed, the way the F looped at the bottom. It was a perfect imitation. I didn't sign this, Gerald. I've never even seen this. I suspected as much, Gerald said quietly. Sean didn't just spend your monthly checks, Daniel. He stole the equity in the house. He used this forged waiver to take out a mochumnamui home line of credit. And, according to the bank records I've been able to sniff out, that line of credit is almost entirely tapped out. I sat back, the air leaving my lungs in a rush. Mochumnamui home. On top of the tai chum home I'd already given them. Sean hadn't just been living off me, he'd been harvesting me. He treated my life's work like a crop he could just reap whenever he felt like he needed a new toy or a weekend in Vegas. Where did the money go? I whispered. Most of it went into that LLC of his Miller Strategic Growth, Gerald said. The one your investigator found. But here's the kicker. I did some digging into the clients of that LLC. It's not just a shell for his spending, Daniel. It looks like a Ponzi scheme. He's been taking investments from people at his tech firm, promising them high returns, and using your equity and your monthly gifts to pay off the earlier investors, while he skims the rest for his Tempe apartment and his jewelry. The room felt like it was spinning. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was a criminal enterprise, and my daughter was sitting right in the middle of it. Does Rachel know? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She's the treasurer of the LLC, Daniel, Gerald said softly. Her name is on the bank accounts. Whether she knows what's actually happening, or she's just signing whatever Sean puts in front of her, she's legally tethered to the mast of this sinking ship. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the shimmering heat rising from the pavement. I'd spent my life trying to protect her from the cold, and I'd ended up handing her over to a predator who was using her as a human shield against the very man who loved her most. I didn't know it yet, but the control Sean accused me of was about to become the only thing that could save Rachel from a prison cell. What's the next move? I asked, not turning around. We could go to the police, Gerald said. The forgery alone is a felony. We could have Sean in handcuffs by dinner time. No, I said sharply. If we do that, Rachel goes down with him. If she's the treasurer, she's complicit in the eyes of the law. I won't let her first experience with independence be a mugshot. I turned back to Gerald, and for the first time in years, the dad part of me went quiet, and the financial architect took over. I'd spent decades finding the structural weaknesses in companies. I knew how to trigger a collapse, and I knew how to pick through the rubble for what mattered. I want you to file a countersuit, I said, but not for the money. I want a quiet, emergency petition to take over the management of the Canyon View property based on the forgery. And I want you to contact the bank holding that HELOC. Tell them there's an ongoing fraud investigation. They'll freeze that line of credit instantly. That'll trigger Sean's collapse, Gerald warned. If he can't access that money to pay off his investors, the whole house of cards comes down. They'll be at your door within 24 hours. Let them come, I said. I'm done being an ATM. It's time I started being a landlord. I spent the rest of the day in a state of hyper-focused calm. I went to the grocery store and bought enough supplies for a week. I went to the bank and moved my liquid assets into a private trust that Sean's lawyers wouldn't be able to touch without a fight that would last years. By Sao. Come PM. I was back in my garage. I wasn't working on the Mustang. I was sitting in the driver's seat. The smell of the old interior, a comfort I couldn't explain. My phone was on the dashboard. I was waiting. At by 10 PM, it happened. A car didn't just pull into the driveway. It practically jumped the curb. It wasn't the Audi. It was Rachel's Honda. She came out of the car before it had even stopped rolling, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. "Dad!" she screamed, running into the garage. "Dad, what did you do? The bank. They've frozen everything. Sean's at the office. He's losing his mind. People are calling him, screaming about their money. He said you called the bank and told them he's a thief." I climbed out of the Mustang, my movements slow and deliberate. I looked at my daughter, my birdie, and I saw the woman she'd become. She was wearing a designer dress that probably cost $1,000, but she looked like she was falling apart at the seams. "I didn't tell them he was a thief, Rachel," I said quietly. "I told them the truth. He forged my signature to steal. Mochum nam mui, hum from the house I bought for you." Rachel stopped dead, her chest heaving. "What? No, Dad, you don't understand. That was for the business. Sean said you agreed to it. He said it was an early inheritance move. He said you signed the papers at the office. He lied to you, Rachel, just like he's been lying to everyone else. You're just trying to ruin him." She shrieked, the desperation in her voice turning into something ugly. "You're doing this because you want to be the one in charge. You want us to come crawling back so you can feel like a big man again. Well, it's not going to work. Sean has friends. He has partners. Rachel, look at me," I said, stepping closer. "Does he have friends, or does he have victims? Because your name is on those LLC accounts. When the FBI shows up, and they will, because Ponzi schemes always attract the feds, they aren't going to care about early inheritance. They're going to care about the treasurer who signed the checks." The word FBI hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back, her hand reaching for the hood of the Mustang. No, it's just a consulting firm. We just help people with their portfolios." "With what capital, Rachel? The house equity is gone. My monthly checks are gone. The investors are calling. Where is the money?" She started to shake. A violent, full-body tremor. He said it was in the Tempe account. He said we were moving it to a high-yield fund. There is no high-yield fund, Rachel. There's just an apartment in Tempe and a jewelry drawer full of things you've never seen. The silence that followed was the most painful thing I've ever experienced. I watched the realization wash over her like a dark tide. She wasn't just losing her house or her money. She was losing the entire reality she'd built for the last 7 years. Suddenly, her phone rang. It was Sean. She looked at the screen, then at me, her eyes wide with a fear I'd never seen before. "Answer it," I said. "Put it on speaker." She did, her fingers fumbling with the screen. "Rachel," Sean's voice boomed through the garage, and he sounded like a man who was drowning. "Where are you? Did you talk to him? Did you get the old man to back off?" "Sean," she whispered, "did you forge his signature?" "Who gives a damn about the signature right now? I need you to go into the safe in the bedroom, take the cash that's in the consulting envelope, and get to the bank. If I can just get Haimui home into the main account, I can quiet the guys from the office for another week. We just need time to flip the next deal." "What next deal, Sean?" I asked, stepping into the light. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. For 5 seconds, the only sound was the hum of the garage lights. "Daniel," Sean's voice was different now, cold, mean. I should have known you'd be hovering. You're like a vulture, just waiting for something to die so you can pick at the bones. The only thing dying here, Sean, is your career as a con man, I said. The bank is locked, the house is under a legal freeze, and I've already sent the PI's report on your Tempe apartment to Rachel's email. A sharp, jagged intake of breath from Rachel. She dropped the phone. It hit the concrete floor, but the speaker was still active. You think you've won? Sean snarled from the floor. You think you're saving her? You're destroying her. If I go down, she's coming with me. I'll make sure the feds know she was the one who authorized every single transfer. She's the one who signed the business taxes. I'll walk, and she'll be the one in a jumpsuit. Rachel let out a broken animal sound and collapsed onto the floor, sobbing into her hands. I'm not saving her from you, Sean, I said, looking down at the phone. I'm saving her from the life you built for her, and as for you, you have exactly 1 hour to get out of my daughter's house before the locks are changed and the sheriff arrives to enforce the property freeze. It's not your house, Sean screamed. Actually, I said, with a forged deed waiver and a fraud claim, the court just granted me temporary receivership. It is very much my house, and you're trespassing. I hung up the phone with my foot, crushing the screen. I knelt down on the cold garage floor and pulled my daughter into my arms. She felt small, like the 5-year-old she used to be, but the weight of the situation was anything but small. She was broken, but she was finally away from him. Or so I thought. I didn't know it yet, but Sean Miller wasn't the type to just leave quietly. He had one more card to play, and it was a card that would force me to choose between my daughter's freedom and my own soul. What he did next changed the game from a financial war into a fight for survival. He didn't go to the bank. He didn't go to the office. He went somewhere much, much darker. Dad, Rachel sobbed into my chest, he's going to kill me. He said he'd tell them I did everything. He won't tell them anything, Bertie, I whispered, stroking her hair, because I have the one thing Sean Miller values more than his own life. I didn't tell her what it was yet. I didn't tell her that while the PI was looking into the apartment, he'd also found the investor list for the LLC. And on that list were names that even Sean should have been afraid of. The reversal was starting, but the rock bottom? We were still falling. And the next morning, when the sun rose over Scottsdale, the first investor would be standing on my doorstep, and he wouldn't be carrying a clipboard. The man standing on my porch at Sao, Bamui AM, wasn't wearing a suit, and he didn't have a clipboard. He was wearing a charcoal gray tracksuit that cost more than my first car, and he had the kind of stillness that only comes from people who are comfortable with violence. He looked like he'd been carved out of a block of granite and left to weather in the Arizona sun. "Daniel Fisher?" he asked. His voice was a low, gravelly rasp that barely cleared the sound of the morning cicadas. "Who's asking?" I said, keeping the screen door locked. My hand was behind the frame, gripping the heavy brass handle. I didn't feel like a 64-year-old retiree in that moment. I felt like a man defending a fortress. "My name is Leo. Your son-in-law owes me $80,000. Well, he owes the people I represent, but since Sean is currently unavailable, and since you're the one who just froze all his liquid assets, I figured we should have a talk." I felt a cold trickle of sweat slide down my spine. I'd spent my life dealing with white-collar thieves, the kind who hide behind offshore accounts and legal loopholes. I had never dealt with the hard money side of the tracks. "Sean Miller doesn't live here," I said, my voice holding steady by sheer force of will. "And I'm not responsible for his debts." Leo leaned in, his shadow stretching across the porch. "See, that's where you're wrong, Dan. Sean told us you were the bank. He said the Miller Strategic Growth Fund was backed by your personal estate. He even showed us some paperwork with your signature on it. The forgery, the Mochamnamui, Hellock wasn't just for a Tempe apartment or a flashy lifestyle. Sean had used my name to vouch for his Ponzi scheme, to people you don't pull Ponzi schemes on. He had leveraged my reputation to bait a different kind of shark. The signature was forged, I said. There is no backing. Sean is a con man who's currently hiding from the consequences of his own choices." Leo didn't look surprised. He just sighed, a sound like sandpaper on wood. "I believe you, but here's the reality of the situation. My people don't care about forgeries. They care about the 80,000, and they know you have it. More importantly, they know your daughter is inside that house. Rachel, right?" My heart didn't just stop. It turned to ice. I didn't realize it yet, But the financial war had just escalated into a hostage negotiation, and I was the only one at the table. "If you touch her," I whispered, my voice dropping to a dangerous level, "you will never see a dime of that money. I will spend every cent I have on people who make you look like a Boy Scout. Do you understand me?" Leo smiled. It wasn't a friendly look. "Relax, Dan. I'm not here to start a war. I'm here to offer a solution. Sean called me an hour ago from a burner phone. He's panicked. He knows he's cooked. He told me he'd give us the $80,000 if I could get you to unlock the house equity. He even offered to tell me where the rest of the LLC's cash is hidden if I handled the situation with you. He offered me up. My own son-in-law had tried to put a hit on my bank account or me to save his own skin." "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him I'd look into it," Leo said, stepping back off the porch. "But I like you, Dan. You've got a spine. Sean is a worm. And worms don't usually have $80,000. You have 48 hours to figure out how you want to settle this. If the money shows up, Leo disappears. If it doesn't, well, we'll have to find other ways to liquidate the debt. Give my best to Rachel." He walked away, stepping into a black sedan that had been idling at the curb. I watched him go, my breath coming in shallow, jagged hitches. I went back inside and locked every bolt. Rachel was sitting at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. She had heard everything. The house was quiet, but the air felt like it was humming with high-voltage electricity. "He's going to kill us, isn't he?" she whispered, her voice sounding small and hollow. "Sean, he really sold us out." "No one is killing anyone, Rachel," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed it. "But we're done playing defense. Sean thinks he's the only one who can make a deal. He's about to find out what happens when you try to short-sell a man who's been watching the tape for 40 years. I didn't tell her the plan yet. I couldn't. I needed her to stay exactly where she was, terrified but safe. I went into my office and pulled out the private investigator's secondary report, the one I'd been holding back. It wasn't just a Tempe apartment. Sean had a storage unit in Chandler. And according to the GPS logs the PI had pulled from Sean's Audi before I'd had it repossessed, he'd been visiting that unit every Tuesday for the last 3 months. I grabbed my keys and my heavy-duty bolt cutters from the garage. I didn't take the Mustang. It was too recognizable. I took my old nondescript truck and drove across the valley. The storage facility was one of those low-rent places with rusted gates and flickering lights. I found Unit Bonchum Le High. The lock was a heavy-duty master lock, but 40 years of frustration gave me the strength to snap it in one go. When I slid the door up, I expected to find furniture, or maybe the missing jewelry. Instead, I found the evidence of a man who had planned to disappear long before I ever canceled the checks. There were 3 duffel bags. One was filled with clothes and a laptop. The second was filled with cash stacks of 20s and 50s that looked like they'd been skimmed from the investor pool over the course of a year. I did a quick count. It was roughly $60,000. But it was the third bag that made my blood run cold. It contained a passport for Sean Miller, a passport for Rachel Miller, and a folder full of flight itineraries to a non-extradition country in Eastern Europe. But there was a note taped to Rachel's passport. It was in Sean's handwriting, dated 2 weeks ago. "If she won't sign the final transfer, leave her. The LLC debt is in her name anyway. She's the fall girl." I stood there in the dust of the storage unit, the heat of the day pressing in on me, and I felt a rage so pure it felt like white light. He hadn't just used her. He hadn't just stolen from her. He had planned to abandon her to the feds while he lived on the beach with the money I'd worked my entire life to earn. I didn't realize it yet, but this was the moment I stopped being a father and started being an executioner. I took the bags, all of them. I drove back to Scottsdale, but I didn't go home. I went to a local dive bar, the kind of place where the air smells like stale beer and broken dreams. I sat in the back booth and waited. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a restricted number. "Did you talk to Leo?" Sean's voice was frantic, hovering on the edge of a total breakdown. "I did," I said, my voice as cold as a January morning. "He's a very reasonable man, Sean. Much more reasonable than me. Look, Daniel, I can fix this. I just need you to wire the money to the Tempe account. Once Leo is paid, I'll come back. I'll sign whatever you want. We can fix the house. I'll apologize to Rachel. You're not coming back, Sean, and you're not fixing anything. I'm at your storage unit in Chandler right now." The silence on the other end was so heavy I could almost feel it through the phone. "You, what?" The 60,000 is gone, Sean. The passports, I'm looking at them right now, especially the note you left for Rachel, the one where you call her the fall girl. Daniel, wait, that was a backup plan in case things got crazy. I love her. I was going to come back for her. You're a bad liar, Sean. You're a mid-level manager with a low-level soul. And here's the new deal. You have 12 hours to meet me at the Canyon View house, alone. If you don't show, I'm calling Leo back and telling him I found your 60,000. I'll give it to him as a down payment on finding you. And then I'm calling the FBI and handing them your consulting laptop. You'd kill me, Sean whispered. Leo will kill me if he finds out I had that money and didn't give it to him. Then I suggest you be very, very punctual, I said. I hung up. I went back to the house. Rachel was asleep on the couch, exhausted by the trauma. I covered her with a blanket, then went to the kitchen and made a sandwich. I ate every bite. I needed the energy. I didn't know it yet, but the next 12 hours would be the most dangerous of my life. Sean was a cornered rat, and cornered rats bite. But I had the 60,000. I had the evidence, and most importantly, I had the control he hated so much. Around midnight, a movement caught my eye on the security feed. A car was idling at the end of the block. It wasn't Leo's sedan. It was a rental. Sean was here, but he wasn't alone. As I watched the screen, I saw a second figure step out of the car. A man I didn't recognize, carrying something long and heavy in a canvas bag. I realized then that Sean wasn't coming to negotiate. He was coming to eliminate the only person who stood between him and the money. I looked at the Mustang in the garage, then at the folder of evidence on the table. My daughter was upstairs, and a man who had sold her out was in the driveway with reinforcements. The escalation was over. The collapse was starting, and as I reached into the drawer for my own insurance policy, I realized that some things can't be restored. Some things have to be burned to the ground so you can start over. What happened next changed the fate of the Fisher family forever. And the final twist? It wasn't something Sean or I could have ever calculated. The security monitor flickered in the darkness of my office, casting a pale, ghostly glow across my face. On the screen, the two figures moved with a jagged, nervous energy. I recognized Sean's frantic gait, the way he led with his chin, always looking for an angle. The other man was broader, shorter, and carried that canvas bag with a familiarity that made the hair on my arm stand up. I didn't know who the accomplice was, but I knew what the bag was for. In Arizona, people don't carry long canvas bags to a midnight meeting unless they're planning on changing the conversation with lead. I'd spent my life analyzing market trends and risk assessments, but as I watched them approach my front door, I realized I was looking at a total system failure. Sean wasn't just a con man anymore. He was a cornered animal willing to chew off his own leg or mine to escape the trap I'd set. I didn't call the police. Not yet. If the sirens started wailing now, the $60,000 in the duffel bags would become evidence. The investors would descend like locusts, and Rachel would be caught in the crossfire of a federal investigation before the sun came up. I had a different kind of insurance policy in mind. I picked up the burner phone I'd used to call Sean earlier and sent a single text to a number I'd saved as Gray Sedan. He's here. 892 Canyon View. Bring the ledger. Then, I did something that went against every instinct I had as a father. I went into the living room, where Rachel was still asleep under the fleece blanket. I didn't wake her up with a whisper. I turned on every single light in the house. The sudden brightness made her bolt upright, squinting and disoriented. Dad, what's happening? Is it morning? Stay on the couch, Rachel, I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from a great distance. Sean is in the driveway. He brought a friend. Her face went from sleepy confusion to pure, bone-chilling terror in a heartbeat. She looked at the front door, then back at me. Is he coming to talk? He's coming to take, I replied. But he's about to find out that the price of admission just went up. A heavy thud echoed through the house. Not a knock, a kick. Sean wasn't pretending to be the polite son-in-law anymore. The door held, thanks to the heavy-duty deadbolts I'd installed the day I'd taken receivership of the property, but the frame groaned. Daniel, open the damn door. Sean's voice was a jagged shriek, echoing through the wood. I know you have the bags. I know you have my laptop. You're stealing from me. That's my future in there. I walked to the door but didn't open it. I spoke through the wood, my voice calm, almost bored. Your future is a cell in Florence, Sean. Or a hole in the desert, depending on who catches up to you first. I've got the 60,000, I've got the itineraries, and I've got the note about Rachel being the fall girl. That was a joke, Sean screamed. I was protecting her. If I have the money, I can pay off the aggressive guys. I can clear her name. Open the door, or my friend here is going to help me open it. I looked at the security feed on my phone. The man in the tracksuit, the one with the bag, was unzipping it. He pulled out a short-barreled shotgun. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, rhythmic thumping that felt like it was trying to break out of my chest. Dad, please. Rachel whispered from the couch, her hands over her mouth. Just give it to him. Let him go. I don't care about the money. I don't care about the house. Just make him go away. I can't do that, Bertie, I said, not looking back, because if he goes away with that money, he stays your problem forever. We're ending this tonight. Total liquidation. I looked back at the screen. A second car pulled up behind Sean's rental, a nondescript charcoal gray sedan. Leo stepped out. He didn't look hurried. He didn't look scared. He looked like a man arriving for a scheduled appointment. He was alone, or at least he appeared to be, but the way he carried himself suggested he had an entire army standing just out of sight. I watched Sean and his hired muscle spin around, the shotgun dipping toward the pavement. The standoff had begun, and I was the one who had choreographed the opening moves. Sean. Leo's voice was a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate the very air. You're a hard man to find, especially when you're carrying $80,000 of my employer's money. Leo, look. It's not what it looks like. Sean's voice was an octave higher now, a thin, desperate sound. The old man, he has it. He stole it from my storage unit. He's trying to frame me. I don't care who has it, Leo said, taking a slow step forward. I care about who's going to hand it to me. And right now I see a man with a shotgun pointed at a house I have a vested interest in. That feels like a breach of contract, Sean. The man with the shotgun shifted his weight, his eyes darting between Sean and Leo. He was a low-rent thug, the kind Sean would find in a dive bar, and he clearly hadn't signed up for a showdown with a professional like Leo. I took a deep breath, reached out, and unlocked the deadbolt. I swung the door open. The light from the entryway spilled out onto the porch, illuminating the four men in a stark, cinematic glare. I stood in the doorway, the duffel bag full of $60,000 sitting at my feet. In my hand, I held Sean's laptop, the one containing the consulting ledger. Here's the deal, Leo, I said, my voice projecting across the lawn. There's $60,000 in this bag. It's all Sean had left in his spider hole. The other $20,000? Sean spent it on that Audi I had repossessed, and a jewelry drawer in Tempe. But this laptop, this has the names of everyone he's been skimming from, including the people you work for. Sean lunged toward the porch, but the man with the shotgun grabbed his arm, sensing the shift in the wind. You give him that laptop, Daniel, and we're both dead, Sean yelled. There are names in there you don't want to know. People in the city council, people in the banks. I'll bury you with me. You already tried to bury me, Sean, I said. I looked at Leo. Take the bag, take the laptop, consider the debt settled. But in exchange, I want a guarantee. Sean Miller leaves the state of Arizona tonight. He never contacts my daughter again. He never sets foot in Scottsdale again. If he does, you get to finish the job. Leo looked at the bag, then at the laptop, then at Sean. He seemed to be weighing the value of a slow, painful collection against a quick, clean resolution. $60,000 is a $20,000 discount, Dan, Leo said. My people don't like discounts. The laptop is worth the difference, I countered. It's leverage. You know that better than I do. You can use it to recover the rest from his partners. You get the money, you get the power, and I get my daughter back. Everybody wins, except Sean. Sean was hyperventilating now, his eyes wide and glassy. He looked at the shotgun, then at the bag of cash, then at the father-in-law he'd tried to destroy. The financial ghost was suddenly the one holding his soul in a leather duffel bag. He's lying, Sean screamed, his voice breaking. There's more. He has millions in his retirement. Make him pay the whole thing. Leo ignored him. He looked at me, a flicker of something like respect passing through his cold, gray eyes. You've got a hell of a way of balancing a book, Mr. Fisher. Leo stepped forward. He picked up the bag and the laptop. He didn't even look at the man with the shotgun, who had lowered the weapon entirely, realizing he was outclassed and outleveraged. Sean, Leo said, turning his head slightly. You heard the man. You've got a head start. I'd suggest you use it. My people have a very short memory when it comes to mercy, but a very long one when it comes to a list of names. You're just letting him do this, Sean whimpered. He's the one with the capital, Sean, Leo replied. You're just the guy who lost it. Leo walked back to his sedan, tossed the bag and the laptop into the trunk, and drove away without a backward glance. The man with the shotgun didn't wait for instructions. He melted into the shadows of the neighboring yard, leaving Sean standing alone in the middle of the street. The silence that followed was absolute. The Arizona night felt cold for the first time in months. Sean stood there, his expensive suit rumpled, his face pale and hollow. He looked like a ghost inhabiting a body that no longer had a purpose. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt a profound, exhausting sense of relief. I had liquidated the threat. I had closed the account. Dad? Rachel's voice came from behind me. She was standing in the doorway, her eyes fixed on the man in the street, the man she had loved, the man who had planned to leave her for the feds. Sean looked up. He saw her. For a second, a flicker of the old Sean appeared, the one with the firm handshake and the smooth words. He took a step toward the porch. Ray, honey, look, I can explain. I was doing it for us. Rachel didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just looked at him with a coldness that I recognized. It was the same look I'd used on 1,000 bad investments. You were going to leave me, Sean, she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. You wrote a note calling me the fall girl. You stole from my father. You put a gun on our lawn. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. You knew exactly what to do, she said. You've been doing it for 7 years. You've been eating our lives. And now you're empty. She reached out and took the door handle from my hand. Don't ever come back, Sean. If you do, I'll be the one who calls Leo, and I won't be asking for a discount. She slammed the door. I heard the deadbolts click home. I stood there, looking through the small glass pane as Sean Miller turned around and walked down the street, disappearing into the darkness of the suburban night. He had no car, no money, and no name left to sell. I turned back to the room. Rachel was standing in the center of the living room, her shoulders shaking. The birdie was back, but she was different now. The wings were broken, but the cage was gone. I didn't know it yet, but the real work was just beginning. We had the house back, but the equity was a crater. We had the truth, but the scars were deep. And while Sean was gone, the investors he'd burned weren't just going to go away because I'd given Leo a laptop. I walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up a stack of papers I'd prepared earlier that afternoon. Not legal petitions, not restraining orders. Budget spreadsheets. Rachel, I said softly. She looked up, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. What now, Dad? We have nothing. He took everything. He didn't take everything, I said, sliding the papers toward her. He took the fluff. He took the lies, but we still have the foundation. And starting tomorrow, we're going to learn how to build on it. Without my money, without his capital, just us. She looked at the spreadsheets, then at me. You're still going to control me, aren't you? No, I said, and I meant it. I'm going to audit you, until you can audit yourself. I thought it was over. I thought the reversal was complete. But as I went to the garage to check on the Mustang, I noticed something on the floor. A small, black USB drive that must have fallen out of the duffel bag during the scuffle on the porch. I picked it up and took it to my office. I plugged it in, expecting more financial records. What I found was a video file, dated 3 days ago. It was Sean, sitting in the Tempe apartment. He was talking to someone off camera, a voice I recognized. Don't worry, Sean was saying on the screen, a smug grin on his face. The old man thinks he's in charge, but I've got one more move. If he tries to cut the money, I've already set up the offshore transfer in his name. If the feds come for the LLC, they aren't coming for me or Rachel. They're coming for Daniel Fisher. I've been routing the investor payouts through his retirement account for 6 months. My heart stopped. Sean hadn't just been using my money. He'd been using my identity as the primary engine for his fraud. He hadn't just made Rachel the fall girl. He'd made me the mastermind. The reversal wasn't over. It had just entered its most dangerous phase. I wasn't just the landlord anymore. I was the prime suspect. And as I heard a heavy knock on the door, not a kick this time, but the measured, authoritative knock of the police, I realized that Sean's final twist was a masterpiece of destruction. Dad, Rachel called out from the hallway. Someone's at the door. They say they're with the Internal Revenue Service. I looked at the USB drive, then at the Mustang in the garage. I'd spent my life analyzing the market, but I'd missed the biggest crash of all. What happened next was a fight for my life, my reputation, and my freedom. And the only way to win was to do something I'd never done in 40 years of finance. I had to go completely off the books. The two men standing on my porch didn't look like Leo. They didn't have tracksuits or gravelly voices. They wore crisp, navy blue windbreakers with IRSCI stenciled in bold yellow letters across the back. They were lean, efficient, and had the kind of eyes that looked through you, searching for the numbers hidden in your soul. "Daniel Fisher?" the one in front asked. He showed me a badge. "I'm Special Agent Vance. This is Agent Rhodes. We're with the Criminal Investigation Division. We have a federal warrant to search this premises and seize all electronic devices and financial records pertaining to Miller Strategic Growth LLC and its subsidiaries. I've spent 38 years advising people on how to avoid this exact moment. I knew the protocol, I knew my rights, but I also knew the weight of the USB drive sitting in my pocket. If I handed it to them now, I'd be handing them a confession that named me as the primary source of the funds." "Dad." Rachel's voice was a thin, trembling wire from the hallway. She saw the jackets, and her knees buckled. She slid down the wall, her face ghost white. "Come in, gentlemen," I said, stepping aside. I kept my voice as cool as the marble foyer. "I assume you've already spoken to the bank regarding the freeze I initiated on the Canyon View property." Vance didn't smile. "We've spoken to a lot of people, Mr. Fisher, including several investors who claim you personally guaranteed their returns through your retirement portfolio. We've traced over $400,000 in illicit payouts back to your primary distribution account." The numbers hit me like a physical punch. 400,000. Sean hadn't just been skimming. He'd been using my identity to create a massive, digital paper trail that led directly to my doorstep. He'd built a synthetic Daniel Fisher, a digital ghost that looked, acted, and spent like me, but lived entirely within the black box of his Ponzi scheme. The next 4 hours were a blur of systematic violation. They took the laptop I'd just recovered. They took my desktop, my tablet, even my old flip phone. They went through my filing cabinets with the precision of diamond cutters. Rachel sat on the couch, silent and staring at nothing, while the agents boxed up our lives. "We're not arresting you today, Mr. Fisher," Vance said as they prepared to leave. He looked at the boxes piled by the door. "But I'd suggest you don't leave the county. And I'd suggest you find a very good defense attorney, because on paper, you look like the most sophisticated white-collar criminal I've seen in a decade." They left it remote. Home PM. The house felt violated, the silence no longer peaceful but predatory. Rachel didn't move. She was in a state of shock so deep I wasn't sure she'd ever come back from it. I sat at the kitchen table and pulled the black USB drive from my pocket. It was the only thing they hadn't found. I'd palmed it the moment they knocked. It was either my salvation or my death warrant. I didn't know it yet, but the control I'd been exercising over Rachel and Sean's finances was about to become my only weapon. See, when you're a financial consultant for as long as I've been, you don't just keep records, you keep backups of the backups. I waited until Rachel finally fell into a fitful sleep on the guest bed. Then I went to the one place in the house the IRS hadn't thought to check. I went to the garage, to the Motngin Chincham Samwe Bay Mustang. I didn't open the hood. I crawled underneath the chassis, reaching up into the small, hidden compartment I'd welded into the frame years ago, a place I'd intended to store emergency cash for a rainy day. I pulled out a rugged, encrypted hard drive and an old, air-gapped laptop that had never been connected to the internet. I spent the rest of the night in the dark of the garage, the only light coming from the glowing screen. I watched the video of Sean again. I watched his smug grin as he talked about the offshore transfer in my name. "The old man thinks he's in charge," Sean's digital ghost sneered. "But he doesn't realize that every time he authorized a gift to Rachel, he was actually signing a digital authorization for the LLC's secondary accounts. I've got his IP address, his biometric signature from his old phone, and his routing numbers. By the time the feds figure it out, I'll be in Montenegro, and he'll be in a jumpsuit." I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over me. Sean was smart, but he was young. He understood the digital world, the way money moves through fiber optic cables and encrypted servers. But he didn't understand the old world. He didn't understand that for every digital footprint, there is a physical shadow. I began to work. I wasn't just Daniel Fisher, the grieving father, anymore. I was the man who had audited Fortune Numchum companies. I started tracing the offshore transfer, Sean mentioned. He thought he'd hidden it behind layers of shell companies in the Caymans. But Sean made one fatal mistake. He used my retirement account as the pass-through. And I knew every single cent of that account better than I knew my own heartbeat. I found the anomaly at Ba, Murlum AM, a series of small, seemingly random, maintenance fees that had been deducted from my account over the last 6 months. Totaling only a few $100s, they were designed to be ignored. But when I cross-referenced the transaction IDs with the private investigator's log of Sean's Tuesday visits to the Chandler storage unit, a pattern emerged. Sean wasn't just moving money to Montenegro, he was using a dead man's switch protocol. The money was being funneled into a digital wallet, but the keys to that wallet were physical. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to execute the most complex reversal of my career. I picked up the phone and called Leo. I didn't care that it was 4 a.m. Men like Leo don't sleep, they just wait for the sun to come up. Dan, Leo's voice was a low growl. You're calling early. Did the laptop have a virus? The laptop was a distraction, Leo, I said, my voice steady. Sean's final play wasn't to pay you back. It was to frame me and disappear with the rest of the capital. I found the wallet. I know where the rest of the 80,000 is. And I know where Sean is going to pick up the keys. And why are you telling me this? Because the IRS is at my door, Leo. If they find that money, it's gone. If you find it, it's yours. But I want Sean. I don't want him dead. I want him back here. I want him to stand in front of those IRS agents and explain exactly how he stole my life. You're asking me to be a bounty hunter, Dan. That's a different fee structure. I'm not asking you to be a bounty hunter. I'm asking you to be an auditor, I replied. The keys are in Chandler. Meet me at the storage facility in 1 hour. If I'm wrong, you can take the Mustang. If I'm right, you get your 80,000 and I get my name back. I didn't wait for him to answer. I hung up. I went back inside and wrote a note for Rachel. I'm fixing it, Bertie. Stay inside. Don't answer the door for anyone but me. I drove the old truck back to the Chandler storage facility. The desert air was biting, a precursor to the heat that would arrive in a few hours. Leo was already there, leaning against his sedan, a cigarette glowing in the darkness. You've got 10 minutes, Dan, Leo said, not looking at me. Then I start looking at that Mustang's title. I walked to Unit Bonchum Lea, high the one I'd already broken into, but I didn't look in the duffel bags. I went to the back of the unit, to the heavy industrial shelving unit Sean had moved in months ago. I pulled a small, magnetic key box from the underside of the bottom shelf. Inside was a single, high-security hardware wallet and a piece of paper with a 12-word recovery phrase. Here's the 80,000, Leo, I said, holding up the device. And about 200,000 more. Sean was skimming from everyone. He was waiting for the house to go into foreclosure so he could buy it back under a different name with this money. He wasn't just a con man. He was a vulture, waiting for his own family to die. Leo took the wallet, his eyes narrowing. How do I know this is real? The phrase is right there. Check it on your phone. It's a public ledger. Leo worked his phone for a minute, his face illuminated by the screen. Slowly, he nodded. It's all here. Every cent, plus interest. Now, I said, stepping closer. Where is he? He's at a motel in Gila Bend, Leo said, pocketing the wallet. Waiting for a ride to the border. He was supposed to leave at dawn. Give me the address. Why? Leo asked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. You're an old man, Dan. You going to go down there and have a shootout? He's got friends. I'm not going to have a shootout, I said, my voice cold and hard. I'm going to make him a final offer, one that he can't refuse. Leo looked at me for a long time. Then he pulled a scrap of paper from his pocket, scribbled an address, and handed it to me. Good luck, Dan. You're a hell of a lot more dangerous than Sean ever realized. I drove toward Gilabend as the sun began to bleed over the horizon, painting the desert in shades of bruised purple and orange. My heart was a steady, rhythmic drum. I wasn't scared. I was focused. I arrived at the motel, a crumbling, sun-bleached wreck on the edge of the highway at Sao, Bamui AM. I saw the rental car Sean had been using parked in the back corner. I didn't knock. I used the heavy-duty bolt cutters I'd brought from the garage to snap the padlock on the motel room door. The door swung open with a bang. Sean bolted upright in the bed, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. When he saw me, his face went from terror to a twisted, ugly sneer. You, he hissed, reaching for the nightstand. Don't, I said, and I was holding the burner phone, the one with the video of his confession. I've already sent this to Agent Vance, Sean, and I've already given the hardware wallet to Leo. You have no money, you have no leverage, and you have nowhere to go. Sean froze. The realization hit him like a physical weight, his shoulders slumping as the last of his arrogance evaporated. You gave it to Leo? That was my retirement. That was my way out. No, Sean, I said, walking into the room. That was my daughter's life. That was my reputation. And now it's the price of your survival. I sat down in the only chair in the room, facing him. Here's how this ends, Sean. You're going to walk out of this room. You're going to get in my truck, and we're going to drive back to Scottsdale. You're going to walk into that IRS office, and you're going to tell them everything. You're going to show them the synthetic Daniel files. You're going to admit to the forgery. You're going to clear Rachel's name, and you're going to clear mine. Sean laughed, a shrill, hysterical sound. And why would I do that? I'll go to prison for 20 years. You'll go to prison for 10, I corrected. Because I've already spoken to a federal prosecutor I know. If you cooperate, they'll offer you a plea. If you don't, if you try to run. I'll call Leo back right now and tell him you have a second wallet hidden in your shoe. He'll find you before you hit the border. And Leo doesn't do plea deals. Sean looked at me, and for the first time, he saw the man I really was. He saw the financial architect who had planned every single move of this collapse. He saw that I hadn't just been controlling him, I'd been budgeting for his destruction. You're a monster, he whispered. I'm a father, Sean. There's a difference. He stood up, his movements slow and defeated. He walked toward the door, his head down. He knew he was beaten. He knew the independence he'd chased had led him straight into a cage of his own making. But as we walked toward the truck, I saw something in the rearview mirror. A black SUV, not Leo's, not the IRS. It was the investors Sean had burned, the ones Leo didn't represent. They hadn't been part of my plan. They were the unaccounted-for risk that every good consultant fears. The SUV swerved, blocking the exit of the motel parking lot. Two men stepped out, and they weren't looking for a conversation. "Sean," one of them yelled. "Where's our money, you little rat?" I didn't have the $60,000. I didn't have the wallet. I had a broken son-in-law and a truck with a half tank of gas. I didn't know it yet, but the final reversal wasn't about the money or the law. It was about whether I was willing to sacrifice everything to keep my daughter's name clean. "Get in the truck, Sean," I roared. I slammed the vehicle into gear, the tires screaming against the gravel as I pushed the engine to its limit. The SUV was right behind us, gaining. The cliffhanger wasn't whether we'd make it to the IRS. It was whether I could survive the fallout of the monster I'd helped create. The desert blurred past, a whirlwind of dust and heat, and as I looked at Sean, cowering in the passenger seat, I realized that the final twist was yet to come, because Sean wasn't just a con man, he was a coward, and a coward with a secret is the most dangerous thing of all. "Daniel," Sean screamed as a bullet shattered the back window. "There's something you don't know, Rachel. She's the one who gave me your passwords. She wanted the money, too." The truck swerved as my heart finally, truly broke. The birdie had been in on it all along. The reversal was complete. I had hit rock bottom, and the only thing left to do was decide who to take down with me. The glass from the rear window showered over my shoulders like a hail of diamonds, but I didn't flinch. I've lived my life by the numbers, and the math of a high-speed chase in a hung-pound pickup truck against a top-heavy SUV favored the man who wasn't afraid to lose the vehicle. "She gave you the passwords," I roared over the whistling wind, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "You're lying. You're trying to poison the only thing I have left, so I'll let you go." "Ask her," Sean shrieked, ducking as another shot rang out, thudding into the tailgate. "Ask her about the legacy project. I told her you were getting older, Daniel. I told her you were worried about your memory, and you wanted me to help manage the back end of your accounts so she'd be taken care of if something happened to you. She gave me the master keys because she loved you. You arrogant old bastard. She thought she was protecting your legacy." The realization hit me harder than the bullet had. It was the ultimate con. He hadn't just stolen my money. He'd weaponized my daughter's love for me against my own security. He'd played on her fear of losing her only remaining parent to get the access he needed to build his synthetic Daniel. I didn't have time to process the heartbreak. The SUV was pulling alongside us, the driver trying to ram my rear quarter panel to send us into a spin. I knew this road, Peralta Road, a winding ribbon of gravel and asphalt that led deep into the superstition wilderness. There was a hairpin turn coming up, one with a steep drop-off on the right, and a solid wall of canyon rock on the left. "Hold on," I muttered. "What? Daniel, what are you?" I didn't tap the brakes. I floored it. I let the SUV think I was panicked, let them draw closer until their front bumper was inches from my door. At the very last second, just as the road began to hook left, I slammed on the emergency brake and jerked the wheel. The truck's rear end swung out in a controlled drift, the heavy steel bumper catching the SUV's front tire with a sickening crunch. The SUV, carrying too much momentum and a higher center of gravity, didn't make the turn. I watched in the side mirror as it tumbled off the shoulder, rolling twice before landing in a cloud of dust and cactus in the wash below. I didn't stop to check on them. In the desert, survival is a zero-sum game. I drove straight to the IRS CI field office in Phoenix. I didn't call ahead. I walked in with Sean Miller, who was now shaking so violently he could barely stand. I didn't look at him. I didn't speak to him. He was no longer a person to me. He was a bad debt I was finally writing off. Special Agent Vance was in the lobby within 5 minutes. He looked at my shattered rear window, then at Sean, then at the black USB drive I held out in my palm. "I believe you're looking for the architect of Miller's strategic growth," I said, my voice as cold and flat as a tombstone. "Mr. Miller is here to give a full, voluntary confession, including how he manipulated a grieving daughter and used a forged identity to bypass federal banking regulations." Vance looked at Sean, who looked like a man who had already been processed by a meat grinder. "Is that right, Mr. Miller?" Sean looked at me, then at the agents. He saw the end of the road. He saw the cold, professional vacuum of the federal government waiting to swallow him whole. He told me Leo would kill me," Sean whimpered. "I want a lawyer, and a protected cell. I'll tell you everything." I watched them lead him away in handcuffs. He didn't look back. He didn't apologize. He just disappeared behind a set of heavy steel doors, a mid-level manager heading toward a high-level sentence. I stayed at the office for 6 hours. I gave them everything: the encrypted drive from the Mustang, the private investigator's reports, the logs of the synthetic Daniel transactions. By the time I walked out into the cool evening air of Phoenix, the financial elder abuse claim was a joke. The IRS freeze was being redirected solely to Sean's hidden assets, and my retirement account was being restored. But I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like I'd just survived a surgery where they had to remove half of my heart to save the rest. I drove back to the house on Canyon View Lane, my house. Rachel was waiting on the porch. She looked like she'd aged a decade in 24 hours. When she saw the truck's shattered glass, bullet holes, and all, she ran down the driveway. "Dad, where's Sean? What happened?" I got out of the truck, my joints stiff, the exhaustion finally catching up to me. I looked at my daughter, my birdie. "Sean is in federal custody, Rachel. He's never coming back." She stopped, her face crumpling. He said you were going to kill him. He said you were the one who stole the money." "He said a lot of things, Rachel," I said, walking toward her, "including that you gave him my passwords for a legacy project." She froze. The guilt that flooded her face was the final confirmation. "Dad, I'm so sorry. He told me you were getting confused. He said you'd forgotten where the offshore accounts for Mom's estate were. I thought I was helping you stay ahead of the fog. I didn't know. I didn't know he was using them to hurt people. He used your love for me to destroy me, Rachel. That's the one thing I can't audit away." I walked past her into the house. It was empty now. The by-muy lem-inch TV was gone. The expensive furniture felt like stage props, and the air tasted like ash. I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out the final document Gerald Torres had prepared for me, the quit-claim deed. I laid it on the table. Rachel followed me in, her eyes red and swollen. She looked at the paper, then at me. "What's this?" "It's your choice, Rachel," I said. "The house is legally mine now. The receivership is permanent. Sean's name is being stripped from the title as part of the fraud settlement. You have no equity, you have no savings, you have muitam, Hongin credit card debt that I've moved into a personal loan under my name." "I don't understand," she whispered. "It's simple math, Bertie. You can stay here, but you will pay me damcham a month in rent. You will work 40 hours a week. You will submit a monthly budget to me, down to the penny. No more designer dresses. No more investments. No more tech bonuses lifestyle. You will live the life you can actually afford. And if I don't, then you leave, I said, and you do it on your own. No safety net, no legacy project. Just you and the choices you've made. That's what independence actually looks like, Rachel. It's not a text message. It's a bill you pay with your own sweat. She looked at the deed, then at the empty living room where Sean used to stand. For the first time in 7 years, she wasn't looking for a bridge or a gift. She was looking at the truth. I'll stay, she said, her voice small but firm. I'll pay the rent. I'll do the reports. Good, I said. I stood up and handed her a pen. Sign the tenant agreement. Then go upstairs and pack everything of Sean's that's left. A dumpster is coming at Tom. Home AM tomorrow. If it isn't in there, it doesn't exist. The next 6 months were the hardest of my life. I didn't give her a dime. When her car broke down, I made her take the bus for 3 weeks, until she saved enough from her paycheck to fix it herself. When her power was almost cut off because she'd miscalculated her grocery budget, I let her sit in the dark for 2 days before she figured out how to negotiate a payment plan with the utility company. I watched her fall. I watched her struggle, and I watched her grow. Slowly, the birdie started to disappear. In her place was a woman who knew exactly what a kilowatt-hour cost. A woman who realized that a num latte was 40 minutes of work. A woman who stopped looking at me as an ATM and started looking at me as a man. The final twist came on a Saturday in late October. I was in my garage, putting the final mirror finish polish on the 1997 Mustang. The car was perfect. Guardsman blue, gleaming chrome, an engine that sounded like a symphony of power and precision. It was the only thing in my life that had turned out exactly the way I'd planned. A car pulled into the driveway. Not a rental, not a police cruiser. A modest, 5-year-old sedan Rachel had bought with her own savings after selling the designer clothes Sean had bought her. She walked into the garage, carrying a folder. "Monthly report, Dad," she said. She didn't look tired anymore. She looked grounded. "Rent is already in your account. I managed to put an extra $200 toward the credit card loan this month. I got a promotion to senior account manager." I took the report but didn't open it. I looked at her, really looked at her. "How does it feel, Rachel?" "It feels heavy," she said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "But it's my weight. No one else is carrying it for me." I nodded. "Good. That's the only way it counts." I walked over to my workbench and picked up a small, velvet box I'd been keeping in the top drawer. I'd bought it years ago, intending to give it to her on her 30th birthday. But Sean had convinced her to spend that day in Cabo on investor funds, and I'd never had the chance. I handed it to her. She opened it. Inside was a simple gold locket that had belonged to her mother. "You're doing well, Rachel," I said. "You've cleared the audit." She hugged me then, and it wasn't the desperate, save me hug she'd given me in the garage months ago. It was a hug of equals. But as she pulled away, she looked at the Mustang. "It's beautiful, Dad. What are you going to do with it now that it's finished?" "I'm going to sell it," I said. She blinked. "Sell it? But you spent 3 years on it. It's your dream car." "I don't need the car, Rachel. I need the liquidity. Sean's mess cost me a lot more than $80,000. I have to rebuild my own floor now." She looked at the car, then at me, and I saw a flash of the old birdie in her eyes, the one who wanted to fix everything. But she didn't offer to help. She didn't ask me to reconsider. She just nodded, respecting the math. "I understand," she said. As she drove away, I sat in the driver's seat of the Mustang one last time. My phone buzzed on the dashboard. A text from an unknown number. "We're done with you forever. Never contact us again." I stared at it for a second, my heart jumping. Then I realized it wasn't a new message. It was an automated memory notification from my cloud storage. On this day, reminder from the year before. I smiled. I typed back the same thing I'd said the day my life imploded. "No problem." I hit delete on the message, delete on the memory, and delete on the ghost of Sean Miller. I'd bankrolled their lives. I'd survived their betrayal, and I'd audited their souls. In the end, I didn't lose my daughter. I just changed the terms of the investment. I turned the key, and the by Mustang roared to life. A beautiful, honest sound in the quiet Scottsdale air. I wasn't just a retired financial consultant anymore. I was a man who had balanced the books, and for the first time in my life, The bottom line was exactly where it needed to be. The revenge wasn't in the collapse, the revenge was in the restoration. And as I backed the blue car out of the garage, heading toward the auction house, I knew that some things are worth more than their price tag. Family isn't a gift. It's a debt you pay every day, with interest. And finally, the Fisher family was in the black.